All right, guys, this is Mr. Bates here. We're looking at our Khan Academy assignment, order of operations with negative numbers. So a couple of things to remember. First, we have the order of operations, and that is GMA, grouping, exponents and square roots, multiplying and dividing, adding and subtracting. And since we are not solving for a variable, so I don't have a variable and an equals in here, I am going to be going from the top down on GMA here, and we're going to be looking at what's going on. So a couple of reminders for you guys. I'm going to scroll down just a little bit here. The first reminder is that we always count how many letters on GMA we have, and I put it with check marks. So here we go. I've got subtraction. There's one thing that's happening, so I check that for the A for addition and subtraction. I've got multiplication, so check here. I've got another addition, so that's my third step. So I put another check mark down there. I have another multiplication, so I put another check mark there. And when we are doing the order of operations, we start at the very top and we finish everything in one category before we move on. So I can't move on to E until I've dealt with all the grouping symbols. Oh, in fact, there is another check mark. I see that I have grouping symbols. Check it. So, and then I keep going on and on and on here until I have finished everything in each row. Now, so here there's only one thing, only one grouping symbols. And I look inside and the grouping symbols only has a -2. If it's just a number in grouping symbols, if it's just a number, then we can move on. If there's anything for me to do, then I would do that. So here, the first line of my work here is going to say the same thing, 10 minus 9, and I put a dot for multiplying. I don't use the X, times 5 plus 6 times -2. Nothing has changed here because it's just a number. Check it off. Okay, then I come down here. I've got no exponents, and I got multiplication and division, and I'm looking to see what is under this category, and I go from left to right. I always go from left to right. The only exception is if you have a fraction. We want to do fractions first. Fraction means divide, so fractions first. That's the only exception. There's supposed to be an R in there. Fractions first. Okay, but if I move from left to right here, I'm going to multiply 9 times 5, and my second line of work is going to look like this. I got 10. I copy everything down. 10 minus 45 plus 6 times -2. Now, some of you guys might be able to go a little bit quicker than this, and that's fine, but I want to show you a way that works every single time, and as you start to get better, then you can find some of those shortcuts. So I check off that one check mark. That's first. Then my next is to multiply 6 times -2. Now we're dealing with negative numbers. Everything else gets copied down. We're dealing with negative numbers, so don't forget to follow those rules for multiplication as we've talked about and built up to. So 6 times -2 is -12. And I've got my second check mark for multiplication, which means my M is all done. And I continue on. And my fourth step, I should have 5 lines of work because there were 5 things that we saw from GMA that we had to do. All right. Now, remember, addition and subtraction, we also go left to right. So that means my next thing is to do 10 minus 45. Okay, so I'm going to subtract here, and I'm going to subtract and get 35. But whenever you take away a bigger number, if you take away a bigger number than what you have, it's a negative answer. Now, you might be thinking, well, Mr. Bates, are you sure? And I would say, absolutely. Let's take a look and see what happens here. The two numbers that I really have are 10 and -45, because there's one negative to the left. So I have a 10 and a -45. And different signs we subtract. That's how we got 35. And we always keep the sign of the most. So we keep the sign for adding. We keep the sign of the most. This is because I'm going to have some 0 pairs here. I'm going to have 0 pairs, and there's going to be some negatives left over. Only 10 of those positives are going to cancel with 10 of those negatives, and we're going to have negatives left over. That's why my answer is still negative. Similarly, I'm going to follow the same process when I'm adding in line 4. I'm going to add those two together because I have 35 negatives and 12 negatives. There's no 0 pairs there. That means I'm going to have 47 negatives. Remember, when we add or subtract, we're counting how many things there are. So I have 35 negatives and 12 negatives. That means I'm going to have more negatives than what I started with. And so that means I have 47 negatives, and that is my final answer, box it, and smiley face. So let me type that in. Hopefully we got that one right. And we did, so that's how you know we did it correctly. Feel free to pause this video, go back and rewind. I forgot to mark that off there. I'm going to do another question, though. Here we go. So other things. So again, first step, write down GEMA. G-E-M-A. What do we see in GEMA? I see exponents. I see subtraction. So there's two things happening here, which means I should have two lines of work. 1 and 2. 2 lines of work. Oh, actually grouping symbols. So 3 lines of work here. Remember, if there's just a number inside parentheses, then we're okay. So if I look inside the grouping symbols, and again, it's just a number. If it's just a number, then we can skip it. So I get to skip G, and I'm going to rewrite it. 10 minus negative 9 in parentheses. Negative 9 is in parentheses to the second power. We have exponents is next. Exponents. So I'm going to do negative 9 to the second power. Exponents is next. Since the negative is included, I repeat the negative 9. I repeat the negative. Since it's inside the parentheses, it gets repeated. So a negative times a negative is positive 81. And my second line says 10 minus 81. And then my last and final step is to do the subtraction. Remember that here I have the two numbers, which is really a 10 and, I have a 10 and plus, that is a negative because there's one negative to the left, so a 10 and negative 81. And that means different signs we subtract, so I get 71, but there are negatives left over. Box it and smiley. Okay, I'm doing an easy one here. It looks like I want to do a harder one for you guys. And now that I've finished all of my check marks, cross it off, that's my answer, negative 71. Okay, this one looks a little bit harder than what it really is. But this is a good example here. I see a fraction in here. So that reminds me I do fractions first. So I got GEMA written down, G-E-M-A. And I see what things are actually happening here. I've got multiplication, check. Addition, check. Another multiplication, check. And a fraction, which is under division. Fraction means divide. Remember, we always do left to right, except for fractions. Fractions are always first. Fractions always first. Fractions are always first. Okay, so that's the only exception there when we move left to right. Fractions are always first. So if I do that then, and I go through my steps here, I've got 4 lines of work. My first line, I have no grouping, no exponents, so I'm going to do fractions first. Fractions always go first. So I have a negative 1 divided by negative 1 is positive 1. So negative 7 times 7 plus 9 times 1. That's my first line of work. Second line of work. Okay, so we did the division. We did the fractions first. Fractions always goes first. Then I do multiplication left to right. Multiplication left to right. So this is going to be negative 49 plus 9 times 1. Third step, I do multiplication again. I always multiply. I always multiply before you add, unless it's in grouping symbols. So I multiply first. Negative 49 plus positive 9. 9 times 1 is 9. And lastly, my final step 4 is to do the addition here. Now, remember, when we say addition, we're combining things together. I have 9 zero pairs that are going to zero out. So 9 of those are going to cancel with 9 of those, and I subtract. I subtract them because the 0 pairs are going to cancel them out. And that means I'm left with negative 40. I hope these examples make sense. If you have any questions, please come to office hours. I love working with students. I love answering questions. Remember, it's always okay to have questions. It's never okay to sit there and not know what to do and do nothing about it. All right. Have a great day, guys.